Good evening, and thank you all for coming over here to the, what is this called, the Gibbons Alumni House, Traditions Hall. I'm Margaret Miller, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all tonight. Cary Leibowitz, our speaker tonight, is an artist, a collector, and a print specialist at Christie's auction house, where he's been for the last 5 years. He was born in New York City and has a BFA from the University of Kansas. He attended the Fashion Institute of Technology and then the Pratt Institute in New York. He's represented by the Andrew Krebs Gallery, where he has a solo exhibition scheduled for May 2005. He has work in the ICI traveling exhibition, Situation Comedy. ICI is independent curators. Several of our shows that we've taken have come from ICI when we take traveling shows, augmented them. And the Situation Comedy exhibition is currently at the Chicago Cultural Center, which is the same place that our Los Carpinteros exhibition, which you all remember from last year, is currently on show. So that's a nice coincidence. Other recent exhibitions include Faggy Faggy Boom Boom, a sound vision at Sound Vision in Portland, Oregon. Another show is Attention, Whoever Stole My Suggestion Box, Please Return It. I'm having a show, thanks. And that's at the Clifford Smith Gallery in Boston. And another show is Hot Dog, Please Don't Forget Eleanor Roosevelt, is at the Shoshana Wayne Gallery, which is in the Bergamot Station in Santa Monica, California. He has also exhibited solo and group shows in Stockholm, Paris, Berlin, Montreal, Vienna, Dusseldorf, and Nagoya, Japan. And finally, but not leastly, Cary has a collection of rooster ties that he's developed from 1960, and it was featured last year on a Martha Stewart show. Now that's a real claim to fame. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Cary Leibowitz. Cary?
Well, thank you, and everyone's been so nice to me so far, so I'm really happy to be here. And I kind of decided to just sort of go in a direction of talking about pieces that I've liked recently, and starting with this print, which John Baldessari did. I thought it had a kind of a parallel sort of history with Graphic Studio. He was a visiting artist at the Nova Scotia College of Art and did this kind of seminal installation at the time. The students helped him cover the gallery walls with "I will not make any more boring art." And he did this print at the time in their print workshop. You know, it's one of these things that, speaking in terms of collecting, it's incredibly rare to come across, and I don't even know where there are any others. The woman who's working on Baldessari's catalog raisonné of prints didn't know where there were any others either. And we put a rather low estimate on it, originally 2,000 to 3,000, hoping that it would just gather not only people that were interested in Baldessari's work and you know, early installation art and you know, a lot of history surrounding California school and just all the other minimalism that went on in Nova Scotia, but that it's just an amazing piece that would cross the boundaries for private collectors that usually just focus on hot contemporary art. I mean, Baldessari didn't do drawings of this. It really only exists today in this print form. You know, obviously the gallery installation no longer exists either. It sold for $6,600, which is not a bad price. I was hoping we'd even, you know, gather more interest than that. But I think it's still one of these great bargains. We sold it just a couple weeks ago.
Spacebar? Spacebar?
One of my absolute favorite artists is Peter Saul, who is a painter who started showing in the late 1950s. And by the 60s, his work was a little too political for the art movement at the time. Art wasn't as political then as it is today. And he continued to make incredibly strong work and large bodies of work, but at the same time, he really fell between the cracks a bit. And paintings are one area where, his paintings are fairly large in scale and substantial in their own right, but the prints really fall between the cracks. I mean, this is the type of print that you can still buy for a few $100s if you come across it. I say if you come across it even for $1,000, it's top dollar now, but it's a great print. I mean, it's incredibly indicative of his work. Very few artists in this time period were working along these lines. But because they never really had much value, nobody knows where any of them are. And I think it's something to think about when you're looking at certain art now. It's the idea of having faith and wanting it, not worrying so much about is it the right thing to buy right now? Will it be the right thing to have 10 or 20 years from now? There's always that hedging your bet kind of thing. And sometimes I play this game with myself all the time. How much am I going to kick myself later because I dragged my feet on a decision? But this type of print and other artists like Peter Saul has a lot of prints out there. This is another one, Angela Davis being crucified by the Department of Justice. Also, a very simple lithograph, standard sort of process, roughly 40 by 30 inches, an incredibly strong piece. I mean, when you see it in person, it's just, it does so much in a room. And I think with the hindsight we have these days, it just becomes more and more important. And once again, it's still, if you find one, grab it, because it's not going to be a lot of money. This is the Birmingham Race Riot by Andy Warhol, and this has a bit of a different history. It comes from a portfolio that's called 10 Works by 10 Painters, and it was produced by the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, Connecticut. And Sam Wagstaff was the director there at the time. And I think he had a really, he was a collector himself, and he had this very Johnny Appleseed sort of like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to spread these seeds. Collectors told me when he was the director of the museum in Detroit, he used to come back with boxes of prints, from galleries in New York and lay them out and make sure all his board members and collectors at museums came and bought stuff. He came up with this idea of this portfolio, which was really one of the first pop portfolios that throughout the 60s many others were produced. But this one, he specifically wanted it to be a very democratic, approachable, affordable, not important decision to buy. I think it was less than $100 to buy the portfolio, which had 10 prints in it. Stuart Davis, Frank Stella, Roy Lichtenstein, Robert Motherwell, Andy Warhol, Ellsworth Kelly. For many of these artists, if it wasn't their first print, it wasn't, it was in their first 5 prints. None of these prints are signed. It's an edition of 500, but because they were so affordable at the time, people didn't really take care of them. They really, if you look at old magazines, you'll see them in people's beach houses, here or there. I mean, they were prints that were costing $5 or $10. Nowadays, some of these prints, especially in great condition, are worth quite a bit of money because the idea of unsigned is a moot point, and the idea of an edition of 500 also doesn't come into play because that's not how many are really out there anymore. I think this is a great print. The Lichtenstein and the Kelly are also great prints, but focusing on on my thought process these days. You know, Warhol is an artist that made quite a few prints, and he used the same screens for his paintings that he did for his prints. The process is exactly the same. As a matter of fact, if you look through really old museum collection books, a lot of the times the Warhols would be in the print department, even if they were on canvas or the Brillo box, because it was a print process. Nowadays, it's a completely different ball game. The electric chair prints, you know, a 30 by 40 inch electric chair painting on canvas would be $3 or $4 million, where the series of prints, he did a portfolio of 10 prints, edition of 250, they're 3 by 4 feet. Some of his largest prints are still probably in a $5,000 or $6,000 range. And you know, they obviously tough imagery, and only recently have even made it to those price ranges. I'd say 5 years ago, they would have been $2,000. And it's one of these things where sometimes, that's what's nice to see what's going on at the graphic studio now with the artists that are working there, because there are a lot of artists that are much more part of the contemporary scene and print market, the print scene. And there's quite a wide gap, especially outside of Tampa. You know, there's a lot of publishers or a lot of collectors who are buying prints, and you wouldn't say they're as much a part of the contemporary market, so to speak. This is the Warhol Fellatio and Sex Parts portfolio. And I think even for this, Warhol knew he was maybe pushing the envelope a little further than you know, being a little apolitical with Mao or the electric chair. Funny thing with this is, it's the one time he did a very small edition. They're an edition of 35, and it's also one of the few times where he used a really romantic handmade paper. It's still a screen print process, but there's a very different approach to it than his traditional, you know, screen print editions on a smooth museum board and flat graphics. This is still, you know, an edition of 35. There are 6 in the portfolio, plus Fellatio was separate. So it's 7 prints. I think last time we sold the 7 prints together, it was about $15,000 for an edition of 35 by Warhol. When I was looking through the graphic studio website before I came here, I was really wowed by these Larry Bell prints. I hadn't seen them before, and I only really know his sculptures. So I put this in the talk because I think it's always nice to be excited by something that you didn't know existed. And there are things sitting out there in people's inventories. You know, you become friends with dealers, you talk to them. Sometimes they are sitting on interesting things that they didn't realize that, oh, there's re-interest in the work. But I got to see this in person today, and it's really quite an interesting piece. This, Richard Prince did this fundraiser for Artist Space in '94, and you know, he's always been the bad boy. And this is done in a traditional painting format. You know, there's a stretcher, except you can't really see it in the reproduction, but this isn't a screen print on canvas. This is a screen printed T-shirt that's stretched and presented in a, you know, a traditional canvas format. So in person, you know, you can really see the neck outline. It's just a T-shirt, but it's an edition of 26. Basically, he did it through he didn't number them, he did the alphabet plus something. And it's kind of a nice transition from high art to bad boy to, at the time I think it came out, it was about $1,500, which, you know, right now, he also did more traditional paintings in this format, which is essentially the same type of thing with extra spray paint involved, but now sell for about $60,000. Donald Judd is a really interesting printmaker so that he was doing prints from the very beginning of his art-making career. While he was still formulating, transitioning from painting to 3D sculpture, he was always working on these wood blocks, and he would either carve the wood blocks himself or he had help from his father. But they're really heavy, rich cadmium oil paint prints, a bit sloppy. You can see the handwork in them, and because of Judd's stature now, the prints are really sought after. And this is a fairly small print. I mean, it's 12 by 16 inches, but it recently sold for $57,000. There's very little work on paper by Judd, and even though it's an edition, collectors know it's a finite amount of material out there. This is another series he did. This set we sold, the Whitney bought. I can say it because it's now public knowledge. But once again, printed by him and his father, and it's really kind of sweet because he signed them on the back, Donald Judd. You can tell how he minimalized and sophisticated his signature and handwriting as his career took off. But these prints, they have a very kind of sweet signature on them. This Bruce Nauman is still, I think, a record price for a living artist. One of the top prices for a living artist at auction. This was also done in bronze, and I think it was less than an edition of 10 for the bronze piece, but this was the wax maquette. What's interesting about Nauman is also he's so hot in the contemporary world, and his prices are extreme, but half the time we don't sell his prints when they come up at auction. This is Studies for Holograms, which was his first print set. It was when he was showing at Castelli, and Castelli Graphics, really encouraged their artists to work in print form. And they were done on a chroma coat, a very smooth commercial type of paper. And, you can see the connection to the bound to fail, the wax piece. He's still working with manipulating the body. And it's 5 prints, each one's about, I think, 22 by 26 inches. It's a great installation when you see it. Really, you get a sense of what he was trying to accomplish at the time. And once again, when we had them in the print sales, it was a very chancy situation whether we'd sell or not. The last couple of times we put it at auction, we put it in the day sale, the lower value contemporary sale, and it's been selling in a $30,000 range. Here's a more traditional print by him, Clear Vision. It's lithographic screen print, fairly large size, about almost 3 by 4 feet. Really just kind of a classic, great piece. Just sold it last week for $7,800. And then this is, he did this as one of the Parquet fundraisers. Parquet magazine's the journal that usually has artists do multiples or editions as kind of quasi-fundraisers to go along with each issue. And this is a videotape of, well, basically a videotape copy, an edition of 200 of one of his videotape pieces. And we were talking a little about it earlier, the idea of collecting video, or how to price video, or should video be editioned, or should it not? And some artists who will have editions of 3 on videotape, or, where does connoisseurship come in? How do I go backwards?
The left arrow.
Another artist that I think is totally super cool, he's about 80 years old now, Richard Hamilton, who, is known as the great British pop artist, but also a really large body of print. And he really pushed the idea of of multiples in some ways and used in commercial processes. Did a lot of collotypes. This is an edition of 5,000. It's a fairly large print, and you know, it's something that you could still get for a few $100s. It's a great piece, and I was talking with the students earlier today. An edition of 5,000, and they're still around, and they're still in good condition. He signed and numbered all of them, and I think that's where the idea of, you know, he's put his authorship on it. If it was a poster in an edition of 5,000 that he hadn't signed at the time, I doubt there would be very many that would survive. Sometimes, you know, you have to formalize a process if you want people to pay attention, especially if you're doing a piece. You know, obviously sometimes if you do a piece on Kent State when it first happens, you do a piece on you know, the vice president shooting somebody when it first happens, it could be trite or funny. But if you're thinking about context 20 or 30 years down the road, sometimes, you know, work has to be taken care of. And I think it has to be taken care of by the artist too sometimes. And, this is another print of his. It's a little more intricate as far as the processes that were involved. He has basically almost every type of basic print process going on. And I think it's very symbolic of, you know, London, 1960s, fashion, Twiggy, all of that. And it's, in the last couple of years, it's been selling in a $20,000 range, which is really amazing because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this was between $1,000 and $3,000, depending on the time of day. And if it was sold in New York, where people didn't really remember the name as well as in London. It was before the internet, where you could see every auction happening everywhere. These were multiples he did, vacuum formed plastic. He also did it in white, and these large editions of 750, although there's kind of a myth about nobody knows where the 750 are. Once in a while they show up everywhere, but people say, oh, there's a warehouse in Switzerland where they're all sitting. This is the kind of thing that, you know, it's a great piece. When you see it, it's so symbolic of just art from that time period.
So what would be the price on that?
I'd say, you know, once again, depending on time of day, between $1,000 and a few $1,000s. They do come up, not often, but they do come up.
Are you hinting it's better to go to the day sale?
Well, for prints, we only have day sales. When I said the day sale for the Nauman, that was for the painting department. When I mean time of day, I just mean, well, you could be lucky and there's no one else bidding against you, or you could have, you know, somebody who's just not going to stop bidding. I mean, that's what kind of makes an auction fun sometimes. You can't believe you got something at a great bargain price, or you can't believe you had to pay twice as much as you thought. These are two other pieces. This one is a really great self-portrait. It's on lenticular plastic. So the idea of the artist looking in the mirror becomes such a physicality. And then the other piece, The Critic Laughs, which was done around the same time as John's, is The Critic Sees and The Critic Smiles. And you know, Hamilton had such a relationship to Duchamp, and here he's kind of joined the two found objects, the denture and the electric toothbrush, and then added his little art highlights of dabs of oil, kind of, you know, really emphasizing that it's art and it's pictorial. Dieter Roth is also, I think, one of these artists that, you know, MoMA had a really great show of his books in multiples and prints just in the last couple of years. This wasn't in the show, but it's one of my favorite pieces of his. You know, he worked in chocolate quite a bit. This is kind of an oversized scale cigar box. You know, it's probably the size of this lectern top. And, you know, it's the bed of chocolate with plastic ducks, and there's little plastic army men in there. And, you know, it's just such a succinct piece. You know, sometimes people are always worried about, well, how's something going to go? hold up, the archival situation, and sometimes with Edgar Shea prints where he used the natural ingredients, or the Dita wrote with the chocolate. They're 35 years old now and they've been holding up fine. I think it's one of those issues that I get tired of the discussion after a while, because you could have something made of steel that falls down and gets dinged, and people complain the Carl Andre is scratched. Or this is another Dita wrote, which also he did around the same time as the Roy Lichtenstein Sunrises. So here it's the slice of sausage on the white and blue paper, sealed in plastic, and you've got your grandiose romantic sunset.
How much would that go for?
We sold it last year, and it was one of those nice surprises. I think we have the estimate about 2,000 to 3,000, and there was heavy bidding in the room, but almost everyone said that they only decided 5 minutes before that they were going for that piece. I didn't even know if it was going to sell when we were going into the auction, and then it sold for over $6,000. But everyone I spoke to afterwards, I was like, oh, what happened? And they're like, I know it. I saw that coming up, and I just decided it's really great. It's not a very big piece either. It's about maybe 16 by 12 inches.
How does that differ from the Virgin Mary and the grilled cheese sandwich?
Well, I'm assuming that's one of those things that is a found situation.
Right.
Well, I think that's where you come into any artist's body of work. Do you have faith in that body of work? Are you interested in what that artist is talking about? Dita wrote, played with this idea of sausage quite a bit. He used chocolate a lot, he used sausage a lot, but then he also manipulated other things to take those forms. He did these really great multiples where he shredded comic books and then put them in sausage casings, so they became sausage comics. There's this idea of, other people can be a lot smarter about talking about his body of work, but thinking about post-war Germany, post-war America, taking this idea of high art and low art and knowledge and what we don't know, and the artists either speak to you or they don't. But if it's exciting to you, I'd say it's a better deal than the sandwich, because the sandwich it's a fluke. If you saw an artist that you've hated for years and you saw one piece that you said, oh, that's actually kind of nice, but I still hate all of their other work, you probably still wouldn't buy that one piece, because you're still not really that interested in what that artist is talking about. I'd rather have a really bad piece by an artist I love than no piece at all. And of course, I'd rather have a really great piece by an artist I love, but most of the time I'm not that lucky. So we all make decisions in what we're going after. If the work is talking to us enough that we do want it, whether it's the best piece in the world or whether it's also the idea of, why are you collecting? Are you putting together an academic collection where you do have this niche and you do want this discussion going on or not? It's I think there are probably 1,000 people who could justify going after the sandwich, but I got to push the prince. So, Just Boys is another really large body of multiples artists. The piece on the right, the Capri Battery, you bring the owner or the exhibitor brings the real lemon to the piece. And the felt suit is an incredibly iconic example of his work. He did performances in the felt suit, but he also used felt and fat quite a bit. And I think it still stands for a lot of what he was working with. Richard Archwager, also probably close to 80 now, but I think cooler than any 25-year-old. I mean, and also what's nice about his multiples and additions are that they're constructed the same way as his unique sculptures. I mean, you're not compromising anything by buying a Richard Archwager multiple. This is published by Vitra, which is done, it's a German chair furniture company, and they've, over the years, invited different architects and artists to do productions for them. And Archwager, I think, has taken on the most artistic bent, because usually their chairs are still within keeping of just pure function format. This is it's almost the size of a love seat. It's a double size, kind of 1930s wooden folding chair. And, if you see it in a gallery space, it becomes a beautiful sculpture. If you see it in someone's house, it just becomes a really great object.
What would you sell for?
Well, I think I've seen it retail at galleries still for about $12,000 or $15,000. The last couple of times we've had it at auction, it's been a while now. We probably haven't had it in 3 or 4 years, but it sold for $3,000 or $4,000. This is a piece called Door. It's something that hangs on the wall. I think very reminiscent of this idea of Renaissance art, and this idea of the viewer approaching it and really physically becoming a part of the piece. You could open it, close it, hear the little click. It's it actually is engaging. I know I sound like a sandwich salesman, but it's
I have a question.
Sure.
Back to the Archwater chair. You said at a gallery it would sell for $12,000.
Well, when we talk about a retail price, and
is the discrepancy usually that large between auction and retail?
well, a lot of the time it is, and there are a few justifications for it, especially when we're talking about this chair versus some other type of art. But with this chair, I'd say there's probably only 3 or 4 dealers that I know of in the country that would be handling this kind of material. And they focus on material that they want their clients to be interested in, and they might buy it at auction because it's come up and it's there, and they'd rather have it sitting in their inventory to eventually sell to someone than let it pass. But if they pay $3,000 or $4,000 for it, they might give a great client a better price. But if you went to an art fair, they might have a fairly strict retail pricing situation on it. And I would say certain galleries, I am behind 100%, and think more power to them. They do great shows. They invest in their artists. They protect their artist market. And if they're sitting on a print for a few years, they could ask full retail. They're presenting it in the context that they want to present it in. And then certain galleries, I think, really take advantage of a retail situation and could ask many times what they bought it for at auction, or don't take auction into account when thinking of the fair market value. When we're pricing something for auction, it's based on past auction history. People come to us because they want to sell something. That's specifically what we're there to do. We're given a certain time span, and sometimes if it's a tough piece, something like this, sculpture in general is a difficult piece for a lot of people to live with. They'd rather have something for their wall, or they're not quite sure how to live with something like this. I like to use the word seductive. We've got to use a seductive price. Something that the auction happens, and if somebody isn't bidding on it, it doesn't sell. And then it sits around, and it has to come up for auction again. usually because the person didn't want it back. So the idea is to get people involved, to get people interested in the piece. Because we're talking about prints and multiples too, you know, it's not like a unique painting where, you know, it's this one specific painting. With certain prints, people say, oh, the print will come up again, I don't need it this time. So sometimes, you know, you've got to do what you can to emphasize to a passive, possible, interested party that you got to jump on it. This is another one of the Formica multiples, and you know, once again, constructed in Archwager's studio, the same way as he does his unique sculptures. This is also from parquet. He had done, there's small tabletop pieces, but he did these at the same time that he was doing large works out of the same type of crepe material. But all these different shapes are still 1,000 cubic inches.
So, Cary, are you saying that these pieces, now that Parquet has sold them out, are coming up at auction?
Once in a while. I'd say they don't come up that often. You know, I love Archwager's work. In some ways, I'm glad it doesn't come up too often because they're usually not the most spectacular prices.
But what would Parquet have originally offered?
I think this was about $900 or $1,000 when it came out, and it would probably not do much better than that right now. You know, once again, a small tabletop sculpture is once again a bit difficult for you know, some people to decide that that's what they're going to buy. She did about I think there were about 30 or 40 different truisms at the time. There was a whole list, you know, and they were in these editions of 10.
Price on that?
You know, her market's been kind of soft on those type of things, a couple $1,000s. And then the LEDs, you know, in all different sizes, vertical, horizontal formats. I was saying that I got an LED belt buckle recently, and in one way I was really excited because it's like, oh, I have my own Jenny Coulter, you know, you set it up yourself, but at the same time I was a little sad because it's like, oh, this format has become outdated in a way. And then a very traditional garden bench, or you know, some type of outdoor bench in white marble.
What do they go for now?
Well, this has a funny history because I would say it's probably in a $10,000 to $20,000 range, but one of those happenstances at auction a few years ago where two bidders just would not stop bidding, and it sold for almost $60,000. And this is an edition of 50, and that price is usually something more for one of her editions of 3 or something. And Cindy Sherman, who you know you all know is a photographer, but she worked with this porcelain company and did these very you know, play off of very traditional tea set, breakfast set, dessert set, and soup tureens. And she's Madame Pompadour in these services. And just to put it in a context, Roy Lichtenstein did these 800 place settings of these dishes in the 60s. They weren't signed or numbered. They were originally issued with certificates that I've only ever seen one certificate. I think most people just never thought of it as something to save. But they were produced by a durable dish company, which was a company that made all the very typical diner, you know, just heavy duty, very durable, not fancy sort of production material.
So do you see those very often?
You know, we see them a little bit, and they're the kind of things that some really highfalutin, very big painting collectors will go for and really use as their good china. You know, so it's maybe $2,000 to $3,000 a place setting now, and we either, you know, sell a large group, or we're selling smaller groups to people who are creating a larger group. Because if you have a $6 million Roy Lichtenstein painting over your mantle, it'd be great to have these on your, you know, your dining room table. You just don't want to serve anything where the knife's going to cut into the glaze. This is a wall of some of the parquet multiples. And then, well, here's where I come into the picture. This is my living room, and I've been collecting lots of things for a long time, and this is a reproduction from a magazine. And I really never thought of this as like something that was like an accomplishment in my life, or something to discuss, or that it was going to make sense to me even, or that I could defend why I went to flea markets all the time and bought piles of junk or anything like that. But it's cleaned up for the pictures, and there's all the different art that I've collected over the years, different fabrics, different, there's found multiples and high art. That round carpet is a Frank Stella rug that was done quasi-mass-produced in the early 70s. The wallpaper was just from a junk store in Germany. But that large painting in the middle is a 1972 John Cary painting. He's a photorealist. And I got it very cheaply at an auction. It was one of those things where I saw it and I just thought it was so perverse. And I really liked it, and luckily nobody else wanted it, and it fit my budget. And I've always been really happy I have it. I have a lot of Warhol things. Sorry about this. The slide, is obviously sideways. But I know you've seen a lot of Vic Munez work, but these four horizontal colored pieces are early Vic pieces. They're called Munez forms, and basically they were watercolor, and he hand drew forms on them. Just basically incredibly banal forms that you need to fill out. And we were friends and showing at the same gallery, and we used to trade work back and forth at the time. I've always loved that set. And then there's Jeff Koons basketball poster, the Nike series. This is the hallway. There's some Peter Saul there on the wall. The dining room, there's some Budweiser wallpaper that I got at a flea market once, and another one of my really strong influences is the architect Robert Venturi. These are Robert Venturi chairs. This was one of my spending more than I wanted to spend. Usually I try and be cheap, but it was also, this was something that was a study for the laminate chairs that later went into production, but this was a non-production chair that was hand laminated with fabric. This is from one of my shows, and the trash can thing was, I always loved these trash cans. I have the Village People trash cans and different things, and I wanted to make my own. So it was a show from a few years ago, and I found a company in the Midwest that still makes those cans. And I had some paintings, you can see in the gallery too, but this was a multiple. And I had two prices, depending on the kind of person you wanted to project yourself to be. It was $50 as a trash can and $52 as an umbrella stand. And you made the decision. And quite a few people bought umbrella stands, so that was nice. But this trash can, I think everything always becomes full circle, and that's what's nice about collecting, because you think about things you bought 20 years ago, or why you saved it, or why you bought it, or why you didn't know why you bought it at the time, but now it makes sense that you do. But, so this trash can on the picture is of me at my bar mitzvah when I was about 13, which was a very low period in my life. And then I tried to do some affirmation on the other side of the can, which is gain weight now, and weight is the impatient weight, W-A-I-T. But I had a weight problem, and I was impatient. I thought I was going to be 13 forever, and but I was really happy I made these trash cans. I hadn't looked at my bar mitzvah pictures until I decided I was going. I found this company to make the trash cans, and so everything kind of comes full circle and sometimes helps the healing process. This is a show maybe a year or two ago at the Philadelphia Museum of Jewish Art, and it was also a different kind of coming out for me, because it was this idea of, I'm not religious, but I said, I feel that I'm Jewish inherently, and that, I'm about to be persecuted by the incoming Nazis at any moment. But I also had this, I grew up in Connecticut, and I work at Christie's, and so there's always this unsaid thing, and it was this weird, even just the idea of having a show at the Philadelphia Museum of Jewish Art. It was a bit of an uncomfortable thing for me, which excited me at the same time. So the show was about assimilation, and I took the Gertrude Steinberg's Conscious Consciousness as kind of a title, and I made all these different clipper ships, which I kind of thought of as a very waspy sort of image. But I also painted, sort of like the little painting plaques on each painting where it says, the ships were either called Assimilatiana or things like that, and painted by Cary Leibowitz, exhibited at the Philadelphia Museum of Jewish Art, 2004 or whatever, 2003. And then I made these ski hats that all say Happy Hanukkah on them, and I had other ski hats that were also, that said the Philadelphia Museum of Jewish Art, and it's still like something for me to get over, to decide to wear the hat, this idea of wearing a hat that says Jewish on it. And then I made the yarmulkes that were hanging from the ceiling, and since it was Philadelphia, I made them all have cracks in them, like the Liberty Bell. And then these are just some other multiples that I've done over the years. I had a show in Chicago where basically you could buy the whole show, you didn't have to go in if you didn't feel like it. They were all multiples on the wall, and one of the multiples was a plastic bag. And you basically got the whole show in the bag, and you could, I think, I forget how much it was to buy the whole show, about $25 or so. And, you could take the show home with you when you were done. And then these whiny asshole cartons, it's just like these sort of mantras of complaining about everything, complaining about myself, all the bad things I do. And I went to a box company, and I found the biggest, heaviest boxes and had them printed on it, and did this very kind of post-minimal installation in a gallery where it was only these boxes scattered all over the place. And the idea was, I signed and numbered them. I think it was an edition of 200. The idea was that, you're always supposed to have this box leaning against the wall, that thing you want to throw out, the thing you're supposed to put in the basement or put in the attic or just get rid of, but it's always there, you just can't shake it. These were a few other multiples. The ice cube tray at the top, it was when I turned 30. So I did these ice cube trays that say, I remember when disco counted. And then the sunscreens, I had a show in Los Angeles, so I wanted to do kind of a car culture multiple. So the sun visors for your car, it's Please Don't Steal My Radio, I'm Queer. And then these ice cream scoops are, ice cream for PC art, ice cream for the Baroque, ice cream for abstract expressionism. And then this is a pair of prints I just did for this last show. And, it's really simple, basic letterpress. So I'm open to questions, or, it's going late, so.
So questions regarding the print department. You made a comment earlier about signed versus unsigned being a moot point. How does that affect value, print being signed versus unsigned?
Well, you have to take into account how the print was produced and the artist's body of work. A Rembrandt is not going to be hand-signed by Rembrandt. That particular Warhol is not supposed to be signed. The whole edition wasn't signed. Sometimes people really feel that they need to have a signature, or a signature adds to the authentication process. The funny thing is, we've had a rash of fake Liechtenstein prints lately, and the production of them decent, but once you really scrutinize them, you could see the flaws, you know, either in the paper or, you know, they did some sort of photocopy of the print and then reproduced that so that the scale or the crispness or the shape of the Vendée dot isn't correct. But the one thing that is totally passable is the signature. That's the easiest thing for them to forge. So I think when you're talking about contemporary art, signature, you know, I think people feel safer having a signature. But, you know, if the piece wasn't signed to begin with, you know, Picasso didn't like to sign. And his early prints, a lot of prints aren't signed, but we find a lot of collectors say, oh, they want to hold out for a signed version. And, you know, whether that signature is actually by Picasso because he might not have signed any of those prints to begin with, you know, things happen over the course of the 20th century. So I think, you know, as a collector, you do your homework and you make your own decision. But I think something as simple as a signature shouldn't always be the final answer in the art itself.
Concerning authenticity, you talked about the set of Liechtenstein prints, and there have been others. What does Christie's do to assure authenticity? I mean, are you looking at each print with a loop, making sure that?
Well, I mean, you know, we sometimes there's a red flag, you know, that something is wrong. You know, you don't know what it is, but something's wrong, and then you scrutinize it. You try and talk to the artist, the publisher, people who remember it. You know, depending on how old the print is, what the situation is. There are catalog raisonnés. Of course, with contemporary art, it doesn't happen as much. I think right now, because Liechtenstein prints sell so well, and I think these forgers thought because they're this flat graphic artwork, they're easy to fake. And they actually, I saw a really terrible copy of the race riot too, where it was just a really poor reproduction. So, you know, if you have a forger who isn't respecting the art, you know, they're not doing a very good job of it, and certain things become more obvious than others. And obviously, we don't catch everything right away. Those Liechtenstein prints were in our catalog, and we pulled them before the sale. But when we're, you know, on catalog deadline and we have 700 prints going into a sale, unless there's a major, you know, snafu, it's something that, you know, it doesn't come up that often. But
would Christie, if it was discovered afterwards? Would
yeah,
Christie
Christie's
buy
guarantees things for 6 years. Yeah. I don't know how they came up with that time span, but that's what it is.
What time of year are the print auctions?
We have 4 print auctions a year. We have 2 print sales that are roughly a 5,000 and below price range, which is February and September. And Sotheby's doesn't have that sale. They only have the larger sale that we also have, and that's in May and November, or the end of April and the end of October.
And if a collector puts a property up with you that you think will sell, what's the commission for Christie's?
Well, it depends on how much property they're putting up. The basic rundown without any real discussion is if something sells below $2,000, our commission is 20%. If it sells between $2,000 and $7,500, it's 15%. And $7,500 and above, it's 10%. There's an illustration charge for catalog, you know, illustration, and insurance is 1.5% of the final selling price.
Is Christie's photographing the work then for the catalog?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of a combination. It's a digital photography process that goes to our computer, goes to our printer, and it's also what you see on our website.
What's the charge on that?
Well, in the off-season sales, the lower value sales, it's $125 across the board per lot. In the larger sales, it depends, you know, if we're doing a full-page illustration, a half-page illustration. You know, obviously, the more special the merchandise, probably the more concessions we make as far as that type of thing goes, the charges, but also how we illustrate it too.
Could you make a comment, just a general one about the print market and what you've seen, say, in the last 5 years?
Well, it's on an upswing, but I think it's still a really overlooked market. I think there's still a lot of great pieces that are very indicative of the artist's work, that not only are indicative of the artist's work, but you can only get it in that print form. You know, it's not like the print is a copy of the unique thing hanging there. If you like a print by Bruce Nauman, that's what's there. I mean, you know, he liked making prints and he worked directly with the print in mind. Even when you look at Warhol, I mean, the idea of a Warhol electric chair print being, you know, $5,000, or even, you know, a Maryland print now is probably between $30,000 and $100,000, depending on which color and the condition. But, you know, a Maryland painting, which is pretty much the same size, is going to be $15 million. So, you know, we all make our concessions. So.
And your percentage is the same buy and sell?
No, for buying, it's 20% up to the first 200,000, and then it's 12% after that.
In terms of, you talk about the process of how you come up with the estimates, and I guess what I'm getting at is how often you probably look at old print sales. Do you use any other techniques? And the second part of that is how often do you make the estimate low to try to get people interested?
Well, there's a couple of issues with that. One is, you know, we're selling on behalf of the seller, so we can only make it as low as the seller agrees to. By New York State law, the reserve cannot be higher than the low end of the estimate. So if we have an estimate of $2,000 to $3,000, but this person says, well, I really don't want to sell it for less than $5,000, but by New York State law, once the bidding reaches $2,000, the piece is sold. So there's always has to be a discussion and agreement, you know, working with the consignor. At the same time, you know, if a piece has had a really crappy history, but in the last 5 years, the artist's work has really taken off, but there really haven't been any print sales since then, you know, or print history of selling at auction since then we'll take other things into account. You know, might say, well, it's a great piece, and yeah, the last time it sold was in 1998 for $2,000, but you know what, it's really a $10,000 to $15,000 print now. So
It's arbitrary, subjective.
well, it's arbitrary, but it's also, you know, you keep your ear to the ground. You want to know what's going on in the art world. You want to, you know, it's marketing, but you know, it's the same way a collector might say, okay, yeah, I know the last time it sold was for $2,000, but you know, this is worth $20,000 to me because I haven't seen one before and I don't know when I'm going to see one again, and that's what makes it an auction.
How much time, if any, do you spend with potential buyers, giving them an education on the piece?
Well, we have what's called a preview, and Christie says that, well, any auction house usually has it. It's open to the public for any department, you know, whatever is up for auction. I mean, if you're ever near Christie's, it's always pays to stop in, see what's on preview, because it's really a kind of a fun thing. You know, whether it's Americana or antiquities or you know, 19th century painting, whatever it is, you're going to see a lot of stuff that you usually don't see, because it's not a curated situation like a museum. So you actually can be more in touch with the pieces, and different departments have different feelings about how they work with their previews. I think because I come to it as a collector, and that I used to go to auctions before I was working with them, I feel like one-on-one is really satisfying to me and important. So I'm, you know, it's sort of one of my obsessions. Like, I am not leaving the sales room floor during the preview because I don't want to miss somebody who I might want to talk to or wants to ask questions. But it's also, you know, I could say to someone when they say, oh, well, I have these prints to sell, why should I sell it with you instead of Sotheby's? You know, you're both basically going to do the same thing. And I'll say, well, because I'm going to be on the floor the whole time, You know, if I love the piece, I'm going to say to them, you know, I'm going to be contacting clients I know that will also love it. You know, I'm going to be there to sell it. Not to do the they don't and I do, but I hate going into an auction preview and there aren't specialists around, and it feels like a ghost town. You know, because auction, it's not curated, and a lot of the times the preview isn't ideally set up. You know, we have hundreds and hundreds of pieces and a limited amount of wall space. So a collector has to really come to the preview and have their own edited eye. You know, sometimes you can't say, oh, well, I'm not sure it really looks great, you know, because it's wedged between 10 other things that you might not have interest in. But you've got to be a little aggressive in the way you look and the way you do your research when you're collecting the things.
Say you're bidding on a print, and the auction estimates $4,000 to $6,000. You're the only one bidding, no one else is bidding. And say you bid $4,200. How do you know, what's the rule of thumb to get to that reserve price? So
Well, the reserve can be higher than the low end of the estimate, but the auctioneer can have what's called order bids, so people have left written bids. So the auctioneer can still be bidding on that order bid's behalf.
Right, what if no one else is bidding? You're the
Oh,
only
well,
one.
then-
How high should you go
Well,
to
you
get to
go-
that reserve?
Well, if you're prepared to go to the low end, that's, in theory, as high as you would have to go. But it's hard to say because we don't even know, the specialists don't know what's on the book, what has order bids. I mean, the bid department takes care of that, and the specialists aren't even given that information. So we don't even have I can tell you, there are times where I'm really encouraging a collector, oh, you've got to come for this piece, there is no interest. It's a great piece, you've got to go for it. And they come in and they bid, and then suddenly, it sells really well, and they're like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know, maybe I sold it too well, but it's...
Will the auctioneer typically go fiduciary into their bids to try to get it up to the reserve?
Well, they could bid on the seller's behalf up to the reserve, but let's say the estimate was $4,000 to $6,000, but the reserve was at $2,000. The consignor said to us, just sell it at $2,000. So if it reached $2,000, the auctioneer can't continue bidding because it's met the reserve, and that's the law.